Welcome. My name is Lauren Silver, and I'm the Vice President of Education here at the Commonwealth Club of California, and I am very excited to welcome everybody here today. It's so exciting to us to see everybody here for our very first school field trip. For those of you who don't know the Commonwealth Club or who have never been here before, we are the oldest and the largest nonpartisan public affairs forum in the United States. We were founded in 1903, which means that 2023 is our 120th anniversary. Pretty good. Thank you. Every year, we host hundreds of programs with leaders and influencers talking about lots of different topics, ranging from politics to education, climate to social justice, entertainment, culture, and more. We have lots of options for students and for educators, including low-cost memberships and free tickets to some of our programs. And every June, high school and college graduates can get a one-year membership for free. So if you'd like to learn anything more about any of this, please visit our website, which is commonwealthclub.org. So Creating Citizens, which is what you are a part of today, is the Commonwealth Club's civics education initiative, building on foundational values of civility, mutual respect, and informed action. Creating Citizens engages young people and adults in meaningful civil dialogue about important contemporary issues so that we can all become active and informed participants in our shared democracy. We're grateful to the Corrett Foundation for their generous support of Creating Citizens and for their dedication to improving the quality of civics education in California and beyond. So we're excited to get started, but before we do, a couple of things for you to keep in mind. First, we're recording this program for video and audio. So please take a moment now to silence everything. Phones, watches, tablets, anything you got that's going to make noise, please silence it completely. No buzzing, no beeping. You won't need any of that. So if you have the courage to actually stick it in your backpack and not see it during the program, we welcome that. That would be great. It looks like we have enough seats. Most of the adults, I think, are at the tables. That's great. If you want to stay with your students in the middle of the room, that's okay too. But adults, you're also welcome just to sort of hang out and socialize with each other at the tables on the side of the room. So this is our plan for the day. We're going to start with a panel of 4 incredible speakers who I'll introduce you to in a moment. They're going to be speaking here together on stage until about 11 o'clock. Then we'll take a short break, and then we'll have some activities, some interactive activities until about noon. And don't worry about those. We will give you instructions and tell you more about that when it gets closer to that time. Lunch, which we will be giving to you, is at noon, and then we'll wrap up at about 1. So to get us all started, let me introduce you to the speakers that you'll be hearing from today. Elise Joshi is a 20-year-old organizer and a senior at UC Berkeley, where she studies environmental economics and policy. As acting executive director at Gen Z for Change, and through her own TikTok platform of 115,000 people, Elise mobilizes people across the country to vote and to take action in labor, climate, and health. She's part of the firewall against both climate nihilism and climate denial, generating millions of views monthly towards combating both narratives and amplifying on-the-ground efforts for a sustainable and just future. Marky Bieshki is a San Francisco author who has written 2 nonfiction books for young people, Into the Streets, A Young Person's Visual History of Protest in the United States, and Queer, the Ultimate LGBTQ Guide for Teens. He also publishes the city's independent news and arts website called 48 Hills. Marky's articles on music, politics, and LGBTQ issues have been published in major newspapers and websites. And Miles Bess is a host and a producer on the YouTube series Above the Noise, which is produced by PBS Digital Studios and KQED. Miles creates comprehensive videos that break down relevant topics for a Gen Z audience with the hopes of encouraging media literacy and civic engagement. Previously, Miles was a broadcast journalist at the Oakland-based nonprofit YR Media, where he reported on a range of topics covering juvenile justice, education, and community community organizing issues. He's had pieces featured in the San Francisco Chronicle, on NPR, and on Marketplace. As an Oakland native, Miles enjoys learning through his work and amplifying underrepresented groups in his community. Elise, Marky, and Miles will be joined by the Commonwealth Club's own school partnerships manager, Griffith Swidler. So please welcome our speakers to the stage and enjoy today's program.
All right. You guys can hear me? Yeah. I'm really excited that you guys are here today. The goal of our program is to encourage civil dialogue by doing two things. We want you to hear from people who are doing it, and we want to give you the chance to engage in it. I also hope you learned something today. We were super intentional about who we invited, both as panelists but also as students. So we have 3 classrooms from 3 different cities, 3 different districts. Can you raise your hand if you're from James Logan? In the back. Arise. Foothill. Awesome. As my colleague Lauren mentioned, we have 3 really great panelists. Marky is a writer. Miles hosts his own video series. And Elise does a lot. Elise, my first question is for you. You're an activist, an executive director, a digital organizer, and a college student. You do a lot of things, and it seems like you're interested in a lot of things. How did you get your start in activism, and how did you get your start in content creation?
Yeah. Oh my God, this is loud. Okay. First of all, it feels so funny just being on a stage, and like I feel like we're the same age. But I would like to say, like, I started being involved with activism by being impacted by the wildfires in 2018 that I'm sure we all remember. And we were wearing masks, or at least some people were wearing masks, and this is 2 years before COVID. The sky was painted red, and people weren't going outside because it was super smoky and you can just feel it in the air. And then 2 years later, it was the exact same thing with the wildfires, but that with COVID, and just realized, okay, well, the climate crisis is hitting me. We have a presidency where they're denying that this is even an issue. And so I really feel like I have to get involved. And so at some point, I just started documenting the Trump presidency because I didn't want to be gaslit by the administration. Like, there's something going wrong every single week, and I feel like I forgot what happened 2 weeks ago. And so I just was making a doc detailing it and sourcing it, and it turned out to be 17, 18 pages, and I posted it on TikTok, and a lot of people saw it and used it to convince their friends and family not to vote for Trump. And I could never do that, but family members that understand, have close relationships with, people who have voted red for a really long time, were able to use my resources to help engage in a productive conversation. And it's just kind of went from there. I post a lot about the relationship between youth engagement and climate, and in voting, but in so many other different ways. And that's really just how I got my start making TikToks in my bedroom.
Miles, I want to ask you a version of the same question. So the model for journalism and media was, for a long time, you studied journalism for 4 years in college, you had a bunch of internships, you worked at small outlets, and then hopefully 30 years later, you ended up on TV or working for a huge newspaper. But with the rise of the internet and social media and cell phones, that whole model has changed. People can create content at a much younger age and distribute that content much more easily than they could even like 20 years ago. Right. I know that you got your start in media when you were still in high school. Can you tell us about how you got started doing what you do and what the benefits were of getting into it at a young age?
Okay. Yeah. So, I started at YR Media, which is a nonprofit based in Oakland, California, so right across the water. And the reason I got involved in that was just like, one, my mom was like, you're in the house too much. Like, you need to find a hobby. You know what I'm saying? And YR Media was dope because it had, like you said, media. So it was like every aspect of media. So there was music production, there was journalism, there was video production, there was all these different things. and it was like youth taught and kind of youth led. So it's like, you know, you're learning things from people that are literally in your same class or might be a grade older or a grade younger than you. And that was just like super dope to me to know that like I'm being taught by like, you know, my peers, and it made it a lot easier for me to like, you know, retain the information and to like actually just get involved. I think to get to your second part of your question, which was like, why is it important, or how has it impacted me to get involved in media so much at such a young age? I think working with, like I said, doing that peer-to-peer kind of work, it shows you kind of what's important for your group. You know what I mean? It's like for your demographic, for your generation. You know what I mean? Like we would talk every day. So we talk sometimes about work. So it's like, oh, let's do videos, let's do this, do that. And then other days we'd be talking about pop culture and just things that were happening in our day-to-day life. And it was that kind of conversation that like really got me motivated to be like, all right, this is something that I want to pursue. Seeing it, like being around other young people, was kind of the thing that made me be like, all right, this is why it's important for me to do it. And I mean, kind of just going to the fact that like, you know, we're preparing young people to take over, right? Like young people are going to be in charge eventually, right? Like some of y'all are probably like 17, 18 years old. You know, you're going to be voting eventually. You're going to be, you know, doing all that stuff. So it's like being involved with other people your age, it just, I don't know, it motivated me to be like, I want to do this and I want to be able to help my peers.
And we have some students from the East Bay. If they wanted to get involved with YR Media, can they just reach out to them? I
feel like you can. So they do it on like a quarterly system. It's also changed like since I was there. Like it used to be called Youth Radio. Now it's called YR Media and a bunch of other things since then. But yeah, they usually do it like every quarter or so. So I would just go to the website if you're interested, YR Media, and see like when they're taking applications. It's like a 3-month program where you're just learning a little bit about everything. So you're learning music production, you're learning journalism, you're learning video production. You might even learn like graphics and stuff like that. And it's just like a cool way to kind of just see, even if you're not interested in any of that stuff, but just to kind of see like what is it that you like, and that definitely like will help you kind of figure out like what it is and what your lane is, and that at least it did for me.
Marky, you've been writing and editing for over 20 years. So you've seen this generational shift that we're talking about up close when it comes to informative content. Longer form writing, and it's now become shorter video content, is dominant. What has it been like to see that shift, and what do you think the benefits are?
Yeah, well, hi, everybody. Thanks so much for coming. You know, it's been kind of a long journey for protest to evolve in the media. You know, protest is such a media-based form, an art form really, that really the purpose of protest is to grab attention however you can. You know, early protests were making pamphlets, giving them out through video and television, like the civil rights protest, where most people were motivated by seeing what was happening on television. So it's kind of gone hand in hand, video and writing, throughout its evolution. But of course it's sped up in the past 20 years, which has been great. I love it. We have direct contact now. You're able to get your message out immediately. You can connect with other people, which is really a big point of protest, to find your community. And yeah, it's been wonderful, really.
Awesome. Elise, as we talk about media and content creation, I want to note that you're all up here because you choose to use your platforms to talk about social and political issues. And you all have chosen to talk about very specific social issues. Elise, you've made videos about nuclear energy, workers' rights, public housing. There are thousands and thousands of causes to get behind. How do you choose the causes you want to be a part of, and which protests to go to, and what to make a video about?
Yeah, I have a little motto of think global, act local. And I, you know, make content about what's going on in the world, and we're all very aware of how bleak things can be, but I believe that acting local and just getting involved with your community is when you get rejuvenated and you realize, okay, I can make a tangible difference and see that difference right outside my window. And, you know, when I talk about universal healthcare in California and a bill about that, sure, it relates to climate, which is, you know, my main passion, but it's also because it's California and I'm a Californian and I know how much I would benefit from having free healthcare that covers everything that I need. And that's really what I try to do. And when it comes to talking to other people, it's, okay, well, what impacts you? Like, what are you dealing with? And maybe how can I engage in a conversation with you to realize, okay, like these are what we align with, you know, this is how climate might impact, you know, housing, which you are more passionate about. Here's how climate might impact immigration, which you're super passionate about. You know, there's a million things to talk about, but they're all related. And especially with climate being my main focus, you really realize just how related they are. You know, we're going to have millions of climate refugees. You know, thinking about the solutions, you can have zero carbon housing while we build more affordable housing. And it's just, the list goes on. And so I try to see how they relate to each other and keep bringing it back so it's not overwhelming to people of like, oh, well, I have to deal with this and that. But no, we can deal with it all together. And but yeah, I think when it comes to what I choose to talk about, it's really labor and climate and how they intersect with other things.
Do you guys want to jump in on that? How do you choose where to focus your energy?
I think it kind of finds you a little bit, you know, I mean, like, for me, LGBTQ rights just came with the package, because I was one of those young people who it was kind of hard to hide that I was gay. So, you know, I kind of had to be out and proud to begin with. And this was during the time of AIDS. This was during the time of intense homophobia in this country. And so I really had no choice but to start fighting for my voice and being who I was. And from that, I got involved with so many wonderful people and so many wonderful causes that it just kind of branched out, because of course it's intersectional from LGBTQ rights, there's Black rights, there's brown rights, there's economic struggles, injustice, social justice, environmental issues. So really, for me, it was kind of starting with who I was and then rippling outwards to kind of encompass all these other great causes.
Yeah, I guess for me, it's a similar thing. I focus kind of like on community. Like that's where I start, right? It's like I look out my window and I'm like, okay, what am I seeing that I like or don't like? You know what I'm saying? And then it kind of just evolved from there. And then with a show like Above the Noise, it's like, you know, our target audience, like we're in classrooms. You know, I work in the education department. So these videos are being shown to middle schoolers and high schoolers. So we have to think, okay, what is going to be relevant to them? What are they going to understand? What do they care about? So it's like whether it's interacting with youth directly and being like, hey, what are some issues that you want us to tackle? Or it can be like, okay, I've been seeing a bunch of, like, for example, I'm working on an episode on highways and removing highways from cities. That started because I saw TikToks about walkable cities. And I was like, well, you know, I feel like that's something that I've seen a lot of conversation about, a lot of people talking about walkable cities and why aren't cities more walkable? So many cars, blah, blah, blah. And then that snowballed to highways. And then my producer was like, well, you know, most of our audience doesn't drive. So like, why would they care about freeways or highways? And then it became about the health impacts of those highways and kind of just like seeing like, you know, how the disproportionate, you know, when you put a freeway in this community, how it impacts their health versus over here where they don't have freeways. And it was like, we'll see how, you know, and kind of just relating it to them and like how it impacts them. So it's like always kind of like a snowball effect where we start with one kind of idea, like, okay, I care about this thing. And then because of all the rules of just like trying to fit it into a YouTube video with PBS, it becomes this other thing that hopefully, you know, people like and watch and can, you know, have conversations about.
Young people hate cars, so you're on the right track.
It's like that's what a lot of the TikToks were. It was like so much of it was just like, I gotta drive 5 minutes just to go to the grocery store. I gotta drive 10 minutes just to, and it's like for us, like that might not seem that crazy, but like when you're going in a place like Texas or something like that, where everything is literally 20 minutes away, it's like, you know.
And what's interesting about that is there is a whole history of being anti-car, being anti-freeway, from revolts against the urban redevelopment that displaced so many communities of color in the 1950s and 60s, through to the freeway revolt of San Francisco in the 1980s that kind of stopped a freeway from going right through Golden Gate Park. Mm-hmm. So that's why we have the Panhandle and most of Golden Gate Park now. So there is really kind of a ripple effect in a lot of these causes. And it's so great to see how young people are embracing this kind of and continuing this kind of history. It's so interesting, but in a different, you know, format, and also because it directly affects them.
Right. Yeah. Elise, your videos, or at least your videos on TikTok, tend to be shorter, like 1 to 2 minutes, super tight, super concise. But Miles, your videos are a little longer, like 5 to 10 minutes.
Yeah.
How did you decide on that length? And do you think in a 5 to 10 minute video, you can include enough information to spark a good conversation?
To answer the second part of that question, yeah, I think within 5 to 10 minutes, you can definitely like spark enough information. You can definitely give enough information and spark that light to have a conversation. I think that how we got to 5 to 10 minutes is kind of like, it's a little wonky. I've been doing this for 7 years. So when we first started, our episodes were a lot shorter. So they were closer to that 5-minute range. And we were pretty cool about it, like kind of give you an overview of a topic, maybe some things that are happening in the news, some headlines that we might have seen, and like why that conversation's happening, and then why that's relevant to you. But once the show kind of started to expand, we realized that there was kind of like more of a need. So it was like, okay, we're not emphasizing enough of like how young people are either impacted by this or like making changes because of this. So like that kind of grew the time of what we can do. And then also like our timeline for how we do episodes. Like sometimes, like I'm sure how long does it take you to do a TikTok?
Yeah, it depends, but it can be hours just to condense it. Yeah.
Right. So for us, an episode can take sometimes 2 months. It takes like 8, exactly. Okay, it takes 8 weeks. So it's like, we're basically like becoming experts in a topic, like researching it like to hell, like till we can't read any more articles about it. And then we write as much as we can, and then we condense it down. And then like, when we see that first cut or like that first script and we're like, oh my gosh, this is 20 minutes. You know what I'm saying? So it's like 10 is kind of like, yes, we got it down. Like, I don't think we could ever, we talked about it, like, how can we get TikToks? And it's like, we can do like half of a section of a video. Like, this is an interesting fact that we can throw in and put some graphics behind, but it's a lot tougher to be able to kind of get to that shorter content. But I do think that you can spark a conversation in 5 to 10 minutes, because it's like, for us, it's like, we're asking that question that we want you to think about throughout the whole episode. We're giving you the context to understand why we're asking you the question. And then we're showing you kind of like relevant examples that are either contemporary or relevant like to you directly as a young person. And then we bring that question back to the end. So it's like, okay, what did you learn? You know what I'm saying? Like, what conversations can you have with your peers right now based on what we just talked about? And then and that's kind of just like, we just throw that at you and just hope for the best. You know what I mean? And it works out.
Yeah, for me, I see it more of a constraint. I mean, I'm meeting people where they're at. I'm given 60 seconds from TikTok or 3 minutes max. And so I just have to do with that. But I mean, yeah, it's more of choosing the platform rather than choosing that length of content. Like, I started on TikTok for a reason. In 2020, that's where everybody was. And it had a special moment where anyone could have gone viral, really. And so I knew that even though I had 0 followers, if I just swallow my pride and make some content without telling any of my friends, like, maybe there was a chance that it could do well. And it did. And so I've realized that still, even, now that we're not in, lockdown, I still have an opportunity to talk to young people directly. This is the app where I can engage people that I know want to be engaged. And, I have 60 seconds to do it. So I work with that.
Marky, you have 2 books, both of which have been written with teenage and high school audiences in mind, young people in mind. You've said before that the books you write are the types of books you wish you had been able to read when you were younger. Can you tell us a bit about yourself when you were younger and the types of social movements you got involved with?
Yeah, sure. Well, I already talked a little bit about the gay rights movement that was happening, that I was involved in. But from then, there were a lot of things happening. I think the first time I really got involved in a protest was the Gulf War that was happening in 1993. And I was just entering college at that time. So it was a really kind of mind-opening experience. I was in downtown Detroit, so there were already a lot of social forces happening there at that time. And suddenly I was part of this kind of anti-war effort that was really complex. And it kind of taught me a little bit about organizing, a lot about organizing. It taught me about how to use the media that was available at that time. The internet was just kind of a baby, so there wasn't that much about it. But we were able to reach people through television, through radio, through basically just traditional civil disobedience practices, like sitting out in front of the hall and making sure, people, administrators couldn't get in until we got in the newspaper, kind of things. So that was really an interesting kind of anti-war experience for me. And it also overlapped with the gay rights experience because it was such a kind of a rebellious gesture that it drew other queer people to the movement. So I met a lot of people in my community that way. And that's when I kind of realized that protest is really, the purpose of it is building community and also making you feel confident enough to speak out because you're with other people who share your views. It's so isolating when you think you're the only person going through something or you're the only person who has these types of thoughts. When you can finally connect with somebody else, let alone a whole group of people who shares your views, it's just so incredibly empowering. I think everybody knows what that feels like. So.
The thing for me, and I said this before, that ties you all together is your willingness to talk about certain issues. Not only willingness, but I feel like you guys run towards these difficult conversations. And the big theme of today is civil dialogue, talking to each other, talking to people we disagree with. Why do you think it's important that we talk and listen to each other, specifically with people that we disagree with? This is for all of you.
Man, that's a big question. I guess I talk through experience. So we did an episode one time on police and schools. They're called like school resource officers sometimes, or SROs. And that was a big episode for us because it was one of the first times that I talked to literally every side of the argument. So I talked to students that were impacted by it, that were like, I don't want cops in my schools. I talked to a school research officer who was like the head of the department somewhere in Texas. So like his whole thing was like, we're just trying to ensure student safety. We just want to make sure, that people can get an education and not have to worry about their lives. And then I also talked to someone who was like a part of a school district who was like, yeah, I understand the needs of the student and I want to protect these students, but also, I have to protect the students. So it was important for me because at first I just had the students. I was like, no cops in schools. I agree. You know what I mean? Like my bias was coming out. But after talking to the RSO and just like hearing what he had to say and kind of just like why he was doing the work he was doing, it's like he wasn't like inherently evil. You know what I mean? It wasn't like he was like, yeah, we're going to send these cops to schools and these cops are going to harm students. Like that wasn't his intention. His intention was to protect the school, make sure that people were safe. And the conversation that we had was really illuminating because like I was trying to press him, you know what I mean? I was like, yo, like, do you see this as a problem? Like, do you see the issue here? And he understood that, there are some bad apples and all that other stuff. But like, he was a really smart guy. And it was just like really helpful for me to be able to like step back out of that bias and be like, all right, I can see that you're not doing this like with malice or like with ill intent. So it made the conversation a lot easy. It made the conversation a lot more easy to have, especially when I went back and talked to the students like, well, he's saying this and, this and that. And it just like helped make that episode one of my favorite episodes that we've done, just because I was able to talk to every type of person. Now, you don't always want to do that. We've had episodes where it's like, we don't want to necessarily talk to the person that's racist or homophobic just because they just, we don't want to amplify their voices. We don't want to do like false equivalence, which is something that we have to deal with a lot at Above the Noise, because the whole point of our show is showing you every perspective, right? We're trying to show you that everything's not always black and white. There's always a gray area. But sometimes like you have to be smart and be aware and be like, okay, this person's intentions aren't like good. Like they're not arguing with you in good faith. You know what I mean? Like there's no good faith in this conversation. They just don't respect you or don't respect what you have to say. So you have to be able to recognize that. And that's something that we go back and forth with. And we've done pretty well, I feel, where we've had very few episodes where we've had that false equivalence, or we've had to like push back and be like, okay, let's put this into a different perspective. So that's just like me talking like through the Above the Noise series, because like that's like the most obvious one. It's like, all right, sometimes it works and sometimes it's good. You're like, okay, this was super cool, super helpful. I learned a lot. I stepped out of my bias. Other times you're like, no, you still are a bad person.
Elise, why is it important that we talk to each other?
We're not going to be able to do anything if we don't. It's pretty simple. But I mean, this is speaking from somebody who's a climate nerd and, knows that, an Iowan soybean farmer who's voted red their whole life is impacted by climate too. And even though they've voted red and we may completely disagree and he may not even really like me based on my identities, but, it matters. But at the same time, you want to protect the small farmer just as much as you want to protect, a kid living in SF from wildfires. And we all are at some point going to realize that this is a really bad crisis and we need to combat it. But at the same time, like, I know that the space that I'm working in is not one to, I'm not going to be the one to convince that Iowan soybean farmer that he's in a crisis. It's going to be his daughter, you know, and how can I provide her the resources to talk to him? And when it comes to social media, we're in an echo chamber, and getting likes and views is not going to ultimately create the just future that I'm striving for. But what it does is it gives me people who already agree with me. So how can I, knowing that, instead of being frustrated by it, how can I use that to my advantage? How can I give people who agree with me resources to provide people, you know, in their life, and convince them of, you know, using source statistics and such, but also, you know, maybe how can we use online and use it as leverage? Like, it doesn't have to be likes and views. What if we could all send an automatic false application to a striking Starbucks store to prevent scabs from being hired over there? And you know, what if we could do that at Starbucks, Kroger's, you striking Berkeley graduate students? That's what I do online, is how can we go beyond likes and views and actually use this echo chamber that we have to make a real difference on the ground. And so I'm all for talking to people that disagree with you, but you can also use people that agree with you to make a difference without having to put so much energy just having a very tiring conversation with somebody who's just not fundamentally just has different experiences.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like a lot of energy is wasted on just jumping online and arguing with a stranger just so that you can feel better about yourself, or you can vent, you know, when that energy could go so much better to connecting with people on the ground, or, you know, figuring out strategies of reaching, getting a message out to people. I mean, you know, not that it doesn't feel good sometimes to vent, but, you know, it just kind of deflects the energy that you could be using to build coalitions and reach out to people who may not have the same advantages in communication that you have. But you know, I would have to, building on Miles and Elisa's points, which were terrific. It's, you know, the point of civil disobedience is to bring issues into the foreground, to keep the conversations going about things. When you are fighting for social justice, you're necessarily fighting against being silenced constantly, which just stops the conversation dead in the tracks. So you really have to come up with innovative ways of keeping these issues in the spotlight, keeping people's minds on these issues and these eyes on these issues. And really, a lot of the brilliant protest organizers throughout history have been the ones who've been able to either create huge spectacles to keep people's, you know, to keep issues and educate people about issues, or they've been able to just shut it down and say, like, look, you're not going to cross this bridge unless you talk to us about things. So, you know, there's various ways to keep conversations going. At the same time, if someone does mean you harm, you should not feel obligated to reach out to them. But at the same time, you want to keep these conversations going and these issues constantly in the spotlight.
For sure.
If the main theme of today is civil dialogue, I think the sub-theme is that you're not too young to engage in it. We have an audience of high school students here today. What would you say to a young person who says, I want to talk with my friends and family about certain social and political issues? I want to talk to my grandma about pronouns. I want to talk to my dad about climate change. But I don't want them to make fun of me. I don't want them to dismiss me. I don't want them to cancel me. What advice would you give to that young person?
Getting canceled by your parent is very funny thought. I honestly, it varies. You know what I mean? I think on one level, like, sometimes you just have to be like, you just have to like take that leap sometimes. Like sometimes, depending on what that conversation might be, it might just be enough to be like, hey, mom or dad or whoever, like, that's not cool. And like that could be the start of it right then and there. Like, I still have those conversations with my mom, like, you know what I'm saying? I'm almost 30 years old, and it's like I still have to tell my mom sometimes, like, you know, like, that's not okay. And she's like, huh, why? And then I'll explain it to her, like, because X, Y, and Z. And she's like, oh, I had no idea. And then like, that's, you know, but I can have that conversation with my parent. You know, sometimes you can't have that conversation with an adult or with like a near peer or something like that. But I think a lot of it is just like having like the, you know, just having the being brave enough to just go for it and be like, all right, this isn't cool. I've been in many situations where I've been around people having like I've been in that barber shop, you know what I mean, where somebody's talking about something that's just out of pocket, something disrespectful, and I've had to be the person like, hey, this is not cool. And it's like, I don't know if it's just me or the situations, but luckily it's been cool enough where people have been like, all right, I won't talk about this, or I will take that next step and do my own research. And then Above the Noise has also been like that for a lot of people. The comment section is always like, I personally never thought about it like this, or I thought I was this type of person, but because of this, because I've seen this episode, I've been able to alter my perspective or change my perspective. But for me, I think a lot of it is, I would just say, like, you got to just start. The first step, like you said, you started with TikTok with 0 followers. You know what I'm saying? It's like, you got to just do it. Part of it is just being like, screw it. Nobody's doing it. I care about this. Nobody's talking about it. I'm going to talk about it.
My advice is just don't use the buzzwords that usually trigger reaction, like the S word. Don't say socialism, but say the things that kind of revolve around it, of just, I think, people in the warehouse should have a say in how the business operation goes too. And like, they're like, yeah, that makes sense. It shouldn't just be the shareholders that don't really know what's going on. And, and so you just kind of cultivate the feelings of, I think that most people are good. That can be a controversial take, but I think that most people just want the people around them to have a roof over their head too, and food on the table, and opportunity for their kids and themselves. And I think most people aren't malicious in that they enjoy the existence of homeless people. Like, it's not a good feeling for anyone. And so speaking with that underlying tone of, okay, well, if we have this common understanding, how can we take it from here? And especially when it comes to climate, I know a lot of young people want to talk to their parents about climate. Make it not about climate. How is climate impacting the issues that your parents do care about? Mm-hmm. And then on top of that, like our parents came from the anti-war movement too. And, my dad can speak on Vietnam and how horrible that was. But when I talked to him about, socialism, which is kind of what we technically were going there to fight against, that becomes a difficult issue, but maybe we can connect them and then have an engaging conversation. So, no buzzwords, but just speak on common ground and then see how you can take it from there, because usually it works out pretty well.
Yeah, that's terrific. And I have direct experience with that, in that a lot of my relatives are in the Midwest are resistant to talking about the climate crisis. And I had read somewhere that this exact advice, that kind of reorient your conversation to something that you both have in common, which may or may not have in common since I work in the media, but a lot of people there think the media is stuffing this narrative of climate crisis down their throat to somehow fool them. And so by pivoting and saying like, oh, why is the media scaring us so much about this? We found common ground to talk about how the media is covering climate crisis. And from then, because they had seen they've seen climate change in their lifetime, they know what's going on. I mean, they're weathering these giant floods and et cetera that haven't happened for hundreds of years. So then we could talk about that. It's like the media is trying to scare you, but also you're stuck under a bridge in your car because the water's rising, kind of thing. So it was a really good way to connect. One piece of advice I do give to young LGBTQ plus teens and youth is always think about your safety too when you're having these conversations. The first thing you should think about is, is this conversation really worth it? Are you endangering yourself? Because we want you to speak your truth, and that's definitely important, but we also want you to survive. So I always say you're going to be much happier in 10 years if you might stay quiet in this situation right now. Yeah. So always be a judge of that. But there are people who feel like you and who you can connect with. This just may not be the right time to make a stand.
Good point.
Marky, you recently had your first book, Queer, the Ultimate LGBT Guide for Teens, removed from a school library in Maine.
Oh.
It gets better.
I'm banned.
That is the fifth.
That's an accomplishment.
The fifth school district in the country that has banned or restricted that book.
Damn.
Congratulations.
Thanks so much.
What was it like finding out a book you had written had been banned?
first a little shocking, and then I was really happy, only because it meant that I was that I had written something that obviously, you know, set some people off, because it must be about an important issue. You know, you're only going to meet resistance if you're doing something right in this is kind of social justice case. It was, at the beginning, it wasn't too shocking, because at first I was banned in Florida, Oklahoma, and Idaho, which are kind of like, you know, cases where I figured that people would be upset about those kind of things. Maine shocked me a little bit, and kind of taught me that, oh, this is spreading. And sure enough, it is. There's a big epidemic of book banning going on right now, and silencing young people and trying to keep them from information, which I have to say is so silly, because taking a book out of the library, that's old school. Like, the kids people are going to get this information anyway, and if anything, banning the book makes people want to look it up more on the internet. So I'm hoping I'm reaching more people from it. But there is it's kind of a scary time right now, where books like mine and other people, and books that are so innocuous, you would think this is not controversial at all, are being removed, because there's kind of a moral panic going on right now, unfortunately.
Before I jump to the next question, in like 5 minutes, we're going to do Q&A. If you guys have questions, we're going to set up a microphone somewhere here. And if you want to make your way to the microphone in the next couple minutes, you guys can line up, or if nobody has questions. Think about it as we ask the next question. There were 2,500 instances of books being banned in the United States in 2021-2022 school year. Elise and Miles, what do you guys think it says about us that we're banning books in modern U.S.?
I mean, kind of to Marky's point, it's like a moral panic more than anything. It's like, I feel like anytime you get any type of progress, there's always going to be backlash. So if you look at kind of like what was happening during like the pandemic, and you saw kind of like the uprisings and things that were happening around like George Floyd, and just like there was like, for me personally, it felt like there was a lot of potential for progress in terms of just like what we could do as a people if like we, you know, amplified our voices, we unified, a lot of us weren't working, so it was like, all right, we are fed up, like let's make some change, let's make something happen, let's make something shake. And then like you notice in the years since then, there's definitely been like steps back, almost like a lot of regression. So like to Marky's point, like some of the books that you're seeing that are being banned, it's like it's like you understand the controversy, I guess, where it's like, okay, if you're in the Bible Belt like Oklahoma, they're obviously not gonna want to talk about some of these issues. But then there's other books where it's just like the main character just happens to be black. You know what I mean? The main character happens to just be like a girl. You know what I mean? Like there's literally nothing other than just like the fact that it's an identity that, or something that just like scares these other groups. I do think that there needs to be more, we need to push back on our end. I think that it's only going to get worse. You're going to see more and more books being banned, and it's not just going to be like, it's going to pretty much be like everything. You know what I mean? Like, it's like they start with the most out-of-pocket stuff just to get to, you know, the more, I don't know how to explain what I'm trying to say, but it's like you start one way and then it's only going to expand and get worse.
No, you're absolutely right, because taking queer books out of the library in Florida has now expanded to censoring AP courses in African American history. Yep. And it just, you know, once people come for one group, it's going to expand to other groups. So that's, you know, it just metastasizes. Like,
and then we're all impacted by those groups as well. You know what I mean? So it's like people are like, you know, there might be somebody out there that's like, why do I care about them banning a queer book or a book, you know, AP stuff about African Americans history? And then it's like, okay, next year it's gonna be, you know what I mean? They're gonna be banning books just that educate you about like whether it's, you know, women's, you know what I mean? It's just gonna keep going and going and going and going. So it's just like, I just feel like it's.
I also think that, I mean, I don't know if this is too political, but the Republican Party's stance is very cultural now, and it's because they're losing. And you can't have your center stance be against drag queens and not be losing. Like, right. You, at some point, you're realizing, okay, well, I can't really appeal to the working class people because I clearly don't stand for them. You know, I can no longer just say farmers and get their vote at this point. And, you know, and I'm denying the very stark reality of a climate crisis. And, you know, this is the result, is like you're doing very reactionary policies of, you know, just not liking trans people. And, you know, and it feeds into, you know, what we're seeing in Florida, and that kind of proliferates across the country now. But I really think that it is a signal that we're doing something right. And I'm not saying that the Democratic, I'm just saying that, you know, us as people, not as parties, are doing something right and having the right conversations because, and doing the right actions, because they wouldn't be putting themselves in such a ridiculous corner if it weren't the case. Yeah. Also want to shout out just something Gen Z for Change is doing really quickly, because the AP College Board did ban African American history and AP African American history in Florida, and we have an automatic bot to send an automatically generated complaint to College Board. 20,000 have been sent so far, but we can keep climbing it to prevent, you know, Florida's policy from being, you know, a policy over here because they demanded it. That's ridiculous. But anyways, yeah, I think there's moments to feel optimistic, and I really want to emphasize that, just because I think we feel really pessimistic a lot.
Yeah.
They're mad because we're winning. It's basically what I tell myself all the time. It's like, it seems really bad, but that's only because they're getting desperate.
Right, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Nobody's at the microphone right now. I was going to say Carhartt in the front row. I know you guys.
Where are the questions?
I just ramble.
That's great. No, you
Okay, yeah. Extra credit if you ask a question.
Oh, that's why we jumped up, man.
So, can you give us your name, your school, and then what your question is?
Okay. Hello, I'm Vincent. I'm from James Logan. So, Elise, you were talking about the buzzword, the S buzzword, right? What do you do if someone accuses you of that without you saying it yourself?
That's a good question.
Oh, that's such a good question. I should know a better answer, given that is often what I'm accused of. You are. Honestly, just I think sneaking past it is often what I do, of just like, sometimes I even just deny it. Like, hey, like, all I'm asking for is for people to have healthcare and housing. If you think that is socialism, it is what it is. But how can we, I sometimes even just ask, like, can we just talk about the issue we're talking about and then break that down and why you don't agree with it? Because the labels really aren't important. I don't want to judge you. Don't judge me.
And sometimes, like, when people make that argument, like, chances are they don't know what socialism is. Like, that happens more often than not. You know what I mean? Like, you've seen the memes where it'll be like, this is America under socialism. And people are like, this is America right now, bro. Like, you know, kiosk at the McDonald's, or, you know, or just try, no iPhone. You know what I mean? Like, yeah. So it's like people often, like, again, bad faith argument. Like, they're not calling you that. They probably don't even know what it means. If you ask them, like, hey, define socialism, they'll be like, something I don't like.
When government.
When the government does something I don't like.
Thank you for your question.
Hi, I'm Annalyn, and I'm from James Logan High School. I have a question for you, Miles. I really love your videos, especially the one addressing racism in schools. And as a teenager and a freshman, I feel very small in my community. So how do I begin my action towards speaking out and being brave against like such a big community like James Logan?
Yeah, I mean, James Logan, I feel like there's a few ways to look at that. I mean, you got to think kind of like on the macro level. So it's like, I think one important thing that's like helped me, especially as a freshman in school, is like finding my community. I think that's really important. So like, you don't have to tackle the whole community. You don't have to, it's not your job to fight racism at school or to, tackle this issue by yourself. I think that especially for you as a freshman, it's important to you to find, it's It's about making your friends. It's about finding that network of people who are like-minded, people that are like, okay, we also feel this way about this issue. And once you have like your little crew of people, it could be two of y'all. You know what I mean? You just need like another person that you can bounce ideas off of, and somebody else that you can like, you know, vent to and just like release to. And then like once you have that community, then you can start to tackle and be like, okay, this is something that's happening, whether it's at our school or in our community or, you know, whatever it is that you want to tackle that like we don't like. How do we fight that? And by not having to do it by yourself, like that's probably like the best piece of advice I can get for you. No problem.
All right. Hi, my name is Vicente. I'm from Foothill Middle College. And Elise, I had a question for you. So I really appreciate how you use TikTok as a platform to kind of, you know, spread these informed ideas. However, I also think that TikTok personally, in my experience, is a platform full of a lot of confirmation bias, a lot of people who are just not interested in having conversations about anything. And I think there's a lot of negative energy going on there and a lot of hate. And I think that a lot of people, and likely a lot of your fan base, are kind of just interested in finding things they agree with and not really being interested in any kind of discourse at all. How do you use your platform to combat that, and how can we as like a generation combat that?
That is such a good question. Also, I grew up in Mountain View, so I'm like 10 minutes from you. So I really feel like we're just like the same. Anyways, this is a really good question. I realized that early on that like I'm feeding into a void by being on TikTok, and how can I use that? So at Gen Z for Change, it's a collection of creators on TikTok that use their platform with the same purpose of I want to make a difference using this app. And have just a collection of schemers of like, okay, how can we use code? So for example, there is 40,000 striking Kroger's workers in Southern California, and they were being fired, and they were Kroger's was hiring temporary hires for the strike to water down the strike's effectiveness, right? Somebody on our team, who's also a TikToker, coded a way to send an automatic false application. So press a button, you're sending automatic false applications to this temporary hiring application to prevent anybody from being hired to make the strike more effective. And so it's a combination of code, which is like separate from social media, but our skills with social media, we know how to make things go viral of, okay, you guys agree with us, right? Working class, you know, the labor movement's being revived. Okay, we're all going to come together and we're going to flood the application. 40,000 were sent. Every single application was taken down. In those efforts, brought national attention to striking workers in Southern California. They got a better contract. And I'm not saying definitely kudos to the 40,000 people who were striking. That's why they got a better contract. But we were able to play a role using the, you know, minds of, you know, people who are already agreeing with us. And so it's less of trying to reach the climate denier and more trying to reach, we know who who's seeing our content, and how can we use the people who are seeing our content for good. Thank you for your question.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Seth. I'm from Foothill Middle College as well. My question is for the whole panel. So we see ourselves kind of in the Bay Area almost in this very unique bubble, especially in most of California and a lot of like blue and democratic states. You had referenced the kind of almost enduring culture that's been starting to be created, where there is almost a resistance to change. How do we address that, and how do we get these important conversations to start in different areas where when they're first brought up, they're immediately shot down? And if you bring these kind of things up, you're called a socialist. How do we get that kind of conversations to start and get going, get that fire started?
Right. I mean, the good thing about growing up in this, like, or being in this bubble that has such a great history of resistance is you can use that narrative to kind of help you along. You know, I feel like because I'm writing from the Bay Area, when I speak to other people in other regions, I can leverage our history of hippies, our history of anti-war. Like suddenly I'm an expert that people have to really listen to because I've come from this place that has been doing this for, you know, hundreds of years. So for me, I kind of just use it as some cachet, some clout to kind of amplify my voice when I'm going to other places. And that kind of brings people who wouldn't normally go to see some guy talking about his book. They want to see, you know, oh my gosh, the guy from the hippie place talk about his book. So for me, that's how I add a little shine to reach other people. leveraging that.
I think for me, on one level, it's like coming back to the community. I try to find people on the ground in those places. You know what I mean? Like, I feel like that's probably like the biggest thing for me, where it's like, okay, like we did an episode on banning books. So it's like, I was like, what organizations are out there are also fighting against this? Like, I know in California, you know, it's California, like you said, like it's the bubble. We're in our own little bubble, so we don't have to deal with this as much. But I know that there's people like us in these states that don't necessarily have that power. So what are they doing in a Texas or in a Florida or in a Oklahoma or in these places? So I was able to reach out to them and get in contact with them and be like, okay, so what are the things what's happening? You guys are doing what? Speaking here. You're doing this. You have these type of situations to make sure that people can get access to these type of books, and just understanding that, like, you know, kind of to Marky's point, like there's always like somebody else that's kind of already like doing what you want to do. Like there's already a history more often than not, and you kind of got to just find who those people are and kind of like what they've done and like use that as a guide to be able to be like, all right, I got to adapt it for what's going on in my community, or I got to adapt that for the internet. You know what I'm saying? I have to adapt that for whatever's relevant to the cause that I'm fighting against or want to speak out about.
I just think it doesn't really matter what people think about you. If you're fighting for more public transit that's accessible, you know, someone in Texas that thinks you're a socialist for doing that, but then sees the success of having BART is like, oh, wait, okay, well, I'm not really into the socialism stuff, but I really like accessible, walkable cities too. And, you know, I think that the Bay Area is like it's just a hub of potential that, you know, they call us whatever now, 20 years, it happens in other places. Yeah. And so I think that what the Bay Area does is it gives people hope when we're constantly reacting to the stuff that's going on in other places. There's book bans, there's, you know, all sorts of things happening in the South and the Midwest, but, you know, what's happening here could be what we deserve rather than what we can fight back against. And so keep thinking about have an imagination, because that imagination actually has potential to actualize here. And so, you know, don't worry so much about, you know, providing healthcare being seen as socialism or something, you know, because eventually people are going to come around.
Thank you.
Hi, my name's Jet. I'm also from Foothill Middle College. My question's for Miles and Elise. So you're both creators of informative content, and from that perspective, I was wondering what your thoughts are on the epidemic we're facing on like fake news and misleading and false information, and how both you and us can help combat that crisis.
Me? Okay. Yeah, are we all familiar with Turning Point USA and PragerU? Yeah, okay. They are funded at the tune of $90 million, and that's insane. So they've got a giant backing them, you know, like this Koch brothers money. Gen Z for Change is pretty much the only thing that counters them on the internet, and we have less than 1 million. And not complaining about that. I have, you know, I'm making a wage, but it's a stark difference. I think the most important thing is reminding people, like my ultimate goal on social media is to get people off social media. And I think that if you can get people who are listening to Ben Shapiro and Turning Point and stuff to like learn their neighbor's name and figure out what's going on in their community, and have, you know, collective organizing for a street light near a bus stop, you know, making women a little bit safer using public transit, like that will get people out of that alt-right pipeline that we're so worried about. And so thinking about how you can build community off the app is ultimately what's going to combat that alt-right pipeline that is so stark on social media and TikTok. It's insane. But yeah, I'm curious.
Yeah, I mean, so like that's kind of like the whole point of Above the Noise. Like that's what the show means. It's kind of like we're taking you above the noise of like the hype and stuff that you're seeing in the media. So I like that's kind of just like how we operate. It's like, all right, we want to make sure that when you watch this video, you understand that like we vetted our sources, we vetted our experts, so you know that we handled our business, so that like you have the information to it's a launching pad. So kind of like to your point, getting people off the internet, like Above the Noise is just like a starting point more often than not. Like, you know, we can only do 10 minutes of a video. But like I said, there's times when like I have like hours worth of stuff that I researched, you know what I mean? So it's like, how do I make sure that I give you the sources so you can understand like, okay, this is a valid, I want to make sure that you know how to find a valid source. Like, okay, this is a legit source, a legit person. Whether they're educated or whether they have the expertise in this field, I know that this is a source that I can trust. I want to make sure that my job is to make sure that you know who that is, know how to find that person, and then also know how to like cross-reference. You know what I mean? I'm literally, Above the Noise is just a launching pad. So it's like if you're talking about book banning, and we did an episode on book banning, and you're like, okay, I heard you mention this organization, this study, or this article, you might start and read those articles, and then you kind of go from there. It's like, okay, they mentioned this person in this article, or they mentioned this study, or they mentioned this university. Let me learn a little bit more. So that's how we combat it, just in terms of like our role in the process. It's like making sure that you just have the tools to know how. And then I guess for like what you can do as an individual to like pass that along, it's kind of like, again, getting people off the internet, and like you have to be that person for other folks too. It's kind of like, okay, this is what I learned. You know what I'm saying? It's easy to have a conversation with your peers. Like it's easy, you know what I'm saying? It's easy to talk to your friends and be like, hey, I learned this thing. It's easier to do that than talking to your parents or an elder sometimes, you know what I'm saying? So having those peer-to-peer conversations where you're bringing that information that you learned and they're bringing that information that they learned, and they can be like, okay, yours says this, mine says this, I agree with some of the, you know what I mean? And you can kind of build from that. That's probably the best piece of advice. It's like using us as the launching pad to get into the real world, to take what we've given you and grow from there.
Thank you. Okay. Mm-hmm. We're going to do one last question.
Hello? Yeah, I'm a little too short for this.
You got you.
Hello? Can you hear me?
Yeah.
All right. So how do you guys like come over obstacles, you know? Like life obstacles, like challenges you face in life. Mm-hmm. Like things in your way. Mm-hmm. How do you come over them? This is for everyone.
Okay. It depends, man.
Yeah, it's hard.
That's a you know, big question. I think it comes in waves. I feel like I've seen like an image on the internet where it's like it was talking specifically about work, and it was like, you know, people think that, you know, showing up for work is showing up 100% of the time every day. You know what I mean? But it's like, it actually looks like this, and it was like, you know, sliding scale. So it was like Monday 30%, Tuesday 50%, Wednesday I give 90, you know what I'm saying? And then Thursday it was back down to 50, but like all of those were still like showing up. So I think that's a big part of it. It's like you have to kind of understand that like there's gonna be waves where like stuff just doesn't go your way, or like there are hurdles that are bigger than others. But like if you show up like consistently every day, like if you show up and you do as much as you can, like you do the parts that are in your control, like okay, if you know you're a student, right? So it's like I know that I can do my homework. You know what I'm saying? Like that's something that you have control over. You know what I'm saying? And like you handle the things that are in your power, in your arm's reach. Then like once you kind of take a step back and look at all the things that have happened, you're like, okay, that little section that I was depressed, or that little section that was super tough, like compared to like the overall time that I've been spending on this, it's like it wasn't as bad as I thought. So I think it's just like understanding that like it's a process, and kind of like it all comes in waves, because it's not, there's gonna be a day where you see an obstacle and you're just like, I don't even want to deal with this right now. Like, I don't even want to look at this. You know what I mean? And that's okay. Like, that's completely fine and valid. But it's just like over time, you'll see that it's worth it.
I'll also just say, like, give yourself a break sometimes. We grew up in a culture, especially in Silicon Valley, where it's very go, go, go. And, you know, work as hard as you can, get as little sleep, you know, you can cut back on friends in order to get into the college you want to get into. I have fed into it, and I almost lost myself. I mean, truly, like, I think that there was a time where I wasn't sleeping, I wasn't eating, and I was really just had so much climate anxiety that I didn't know what to do with it, of just like, oh, the world is overwhelming, and I want to give up. And then I run 20 miles a week every week, and I just went on like a 20-mile bike ride to Treasure Island with my partner, and like it was it revives you. It connects you back to like why you're doing things and taking care of yourself. I like to say I sleep 8 hours a day and I eat 3 meals a day. And I think we often forget to do that and take care of ourselves. And it's super overwhelming to be our age and growing up in this world. And I think the most important thing you can do is to take care of yourself. Like, we're going to be in this fight for a better world our whole life. And you want to be able to be 40 doing this. You will burn out at 22 if you don't take care of yourself. And, you know, just reminding yourself of your values and all of that is important as well. So, yeah, just be kind. Be kind to yourself.
Yeah, great advice. And I would just add maybe self-awareness, learning about yourself, knowing yourself. I mean, I'm still learning about myself, and I'm like ancient up here, but you know, I used to be the kind of person who just was like a bull in a china shop. I just charged right through because I was right, and this is, you know, I was righteous on top of that. But knowing myself a little more and being more self-aware, I realized maybe that's not the approach to the problem that the problem requires. So I learned how to kind of diversify my approaches, calm myself down, take care of myself, and think about things a little before I went after them.
Yeah. Thank you.
So we're actually going to stop